Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Monday, February 13th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. We're going to start off by heading over to Allen, where he sits down with Andrew Hollister, CISO at LogRhythm, to discuss why zero trust adoption will continue to be slow in the face of economic uncertainty and what organizations need to consider in 2023. We will then air two sessions of the DevOps Experience 2022. In the first session, Dan Garfield, co-founder and chief open source officer at CodeFresh, looks at the best strategies for getting open source tools to work together to improve the software delivery supply chain. Then Tim Stylings and Soumya Menon from ConnectAll discuss the critical role that visualizing your software delivery value stream plays in the evolution of DevOps. We then go to Mitch, where he meets with Manoj Nair, Snyk Chief Product Officer, to discuss ServiceNow's strategic investment in Snyk and their integration with the ServiceNow Vulnerability Response Solution. We will then have 3 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Tidelift CEO Donald Fisher, as Donald explains how organizations are actually going about ensuring the security of software supply chains made up of open source software components. Then, Mike interviews Johannes Wickland, Head of Information Security at Jotform, as Johannes explains what challenges fellow cybersecurity professionals should expect to encounter in 2023. Finally, Mike will interview newly appointed Toughen CEO Raymond Brancato, as Raymond explains why the only way to ensure cybersecurity in an era where the attack surface continues to expand is to invest more in automation. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm really happy to have our next guest on. His name is Andrew Hollister, and Andrew's going to tell you a little bit about himself and his company here in a second. Hey Andrew, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you on. So Andrew, don't want to embarrass you, but tell us the Andrew Hollister story a bit.
Yeah, okay, I'll try to. So, I've got a wide background in infrastructure and programming and support and all kinds of different things, and kind of fell into the security space, getting on for 20 years ago. So I've worked both in the financial sector and defense and a few other places besides, and found myself looking at LogRhythm about 10 years ago and really interested in the kind of both the visibility that LogRhythm gave into the kind of cybersecurity problems that I was seeing, but also the opportunity to dig in, to kind of surface the problems that we see, and also to respond to them in different ways. And, I think in terms of LogRhythm, what we're really seeing is, we have got an ever-evolving threat landscape, right? Digital transformation, geopolitics, the economic situation, and one thing and another just constantly are changing the digital landscape, and of course that impacts the threat landscape, right? And security teams ultimately are trying to deal with this kind of ever-evolving threat landscape, and they're finding it impossible, really, to effectively defend against attacks. So what we're trying to do is provide that platform which gives teams both the kind of overall visibility and the detailed analytics. So they can kind of cut through the noise and quickly secure their environments.
Fair enough. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So, Andrew, it's funny. I was working this morning planning for our RSA conference. Every year at RSA conference, we do a DevSecOps event on Monday of the RSA week, though last year it was Tuesday. But, certainly last year at RSA conference, I would say the big words on everyone's mouth was this zero trust, the idea of zero trust. And it's not the first year. We've heard zero trust for a couple of years now. But I think, there's a crossing the chasm when it comes to security concepts. So I think last year was kind of zero trust crossed the chasm to mainstream.
Yeah.
I think mainstream organizations are now understanding that zero trust by default, or zero trust should be your default security posture, and then you turn on as needed. Of course, there's zero trust and there's zero trust, right? There's levels and layers, if you will, of zero trust. And I think a lot of organizations are having a tough time. Like, they agree with the concept, they understand the logic of it. The implementation sometimes leaves a little to be desired. Number one, do you agree with that? Number two, what can we do to help these folks?
Yeah, I do agree with that, and I think it's kind of almost the bane of the cybersecurity industry, right? Every time a new concept comes out, everybody rushes to adopt it, and it kind of becomes whatever you want it to be, or whatever your marketing.
They embrace and extend it, right?
Absolutely.
Remember Microsoft used to say that, we embrace and extend it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case here. And I think what's confusing for people is that kind of, well, what is it? Can I go and buy one? And I think this point really that zero trust isn't a product. It's not something you can go out there and buy off the shelf and kind of implement and, big check, we're done. I'm now zero trust. It's more a set of guiding principles, or almost a philosophy of an approach to cybersecurity versus an actual product or implementation. And you talked about it being kind of up and coming. I think it's been up and coming for a very long time. I actually did some research on this recently, and you can actually trace the principles back at least as far as 1994, when a cybersecurity white paper was written about trying to adopt these principles. But nobody had the capability to do it back then. And I think there were probably two big triggers for more visibility. One was John Kindervag's kind of seminal work on zero trust, and that was back in 2009-10. And of course, Google had the Operation Aurora against them, right? And they spent almost 7 years developing their own in-house zero trust model. And of course, no technologies really existed to do it. They had to invent the whole thing from scratch. So, it has been around for a while. And I think that's possibly part of the challenge. People look at zero trust approaches and think, well, I recognize some of this and I've seen some of that. So what is this thing really? And, ultimately, I think to boil it down, I think it's kind of generally recognized there's really three pillars. So it's that all entities are untrusted by default. So kind of in the good old days, you had your castle and moat, right? Everything was on the inside and you trusted the inside. So we're in this kind of assume breach as the one pillar. The second one being that least privilege is enforced. So rather than a single a single access, and then I've got access to everything. I need to verify identity every time I go and do something new. And the third pillar is really around that comprehensive, broad security monitoring, so that everything is logged and then everything is analyzed. And with those three as pillars, then you're not so much having a product conversation as a outcomes and an architecture type conversation.
Don't disagree with you at all. He was right. I mean, I know John, and I remember when he first put forth the zero trust thing, and of course Aurora. But Andrew, what amazes me, so it's been 10 years, and we've had a chance to come to grips with it, if you will. But you look at some recent breaches around, and I'm not here to blame or point fingers, but like the LastPass breach, right?
Yeah.
Where they were able to compromise evidently a person who, for whatever reason, had access to the cloud resources that the hashed up encrypted vaults were on, and they were able to literally empty the vaults, right? Scary. Why would someone have that level of access? And 12 years after this whole concept came up, and I think that's the issue. Is I think from a concept point of view, people accept it and agree with it. The devil's in the details about what that really means, right? Because here's the other complicating factor. It's easy to do zero trust when I've got everything in my own little castle with a moat around it, and I could very easily segment out my networks and decide who has what, and I got a big fat DLP thing at the drawbridge, and I'm watching what's coming. But that's not reality anymore. We live in a do anything from anywhere world.
Yeah,
at every access.
We have IAM, Identity and Access Management. Well, access is peeled off from identity in a lot of places now, right? It's not enough to know that it's Andrew. What does that mean from your access to this resource versus that resource? And at every single resource, there's a zero trust decision to be made.
Yeah.
And it's complicated. It can get real complicated real quick, right? The amount of people by the amount of access decisions.
Yeah, it's undoubtedly complex, and I think I kind of look at it in this way: if you're starting a brand new company today with no legacy architecture, it would probably be quite easy. The tools are there.
Yeah, greenfields are always easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the brownfields that
That is the big challenge. And I think the very interesting thing, I actually read through, Google published all of their documentation. I think it was 7 different documents on how they approached their zero trust journey. And it was very interesting to see that kind of focus they had on not breaking existing business processes. So they really put thought into it. And spent time understanding, okay, we've got this data here and it's in this kind of particular silo. Who uses that? How do they use it? They spent time to actually map that out. And I think this is where the kind of challenge is for organizations in all that sprawl, in those brownfield sites. Who knows actually who's using the data through what tools, in what ways, to what purpose? Typically, you don't really know that. So it does take a little bit of a structured approach in order to identify, okay, what are my most critical assets out of all this data sprawl? Where do I need to focus my attention? And from our own experience as a adopter of zero trusts ourselves, you've got to kind of give it time to go through that journey and kind of take the wins along the way. You in a brownfield site, you're not going to go from your legacy perimeter remote architecture to a full zero trust implementation overnight. It takes time, right? And understanding, here is my most critical data. These are the people who access it. That's really the foundation for the rest of it. But I think those kind of quick wins along the way, things like implement multi-factor authentication. Numbers of organizations haven't even taken that step. So in some senses, it's no wonder we're still seeing so many breaches and compromises. That gives you a very quick win. Manage your kind of employee onboarding and offboarding, so you know who it is who has access, and you haven't got lots of accounts kicking around that really should have been closed down perhaps weeks or months or years beforehand. And I think in general, the industry struggles with this. Zero Trust really takes a lot of basic principles and weaves them together. And history shows our industry is not that good at getting the basics done and doing them reliably.
Well, I think there's like some laws of physics at play here. If it was one basic thing, we got a shot. Two basic things make it 3 times as hard. 3 basic things make it 9 times as hard. 4 things that we're weaving together probably make it impossible. Right?
Yeah.
That's more of the reality, I guess. But the other thing, though, is we sit here 12 years after John Kinderberg first thought about it, and we've had a chance to ferment on this. You would think we'd have some really good solutions out there. Right?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
I think it's this, that because zero trust is a principle rather than a product in and of its own right, it demands a broader way of thinking, and that products integrate with each other well. And certainly we started off on this journey back in around 2018, when GDPR was just coming out, because it provided us some good synergies there. And at that time, you had to do a lot of work in terms of building your own integrations and scripting and all this kind of thing to make the different tooling integrate with each other nicely. I think as here we are in 2023, I think vendors in general are recognizing much more there needs to be more easy integration. We need to play nicely with a lot of other technologies and provide the capabilities to do that. And I think as that happens, then we'll see it's easier for organizations to integrate, for example, your HR onboarding system with your Active Directory or your other identity and access management. It's those kind of integrations which really help organizations to deploy an architecture that adheres to zero trust principles.
Agreed. Andrew, we're over our time. I apologize, but this is something I can talk about all day. I imagine there will be RSAs coming up in April, as I mentioned at the outset. We'll be at Broadcast Alley all week doing videos. If you're there, maybe you come by. We'll continue this conversation.
Yeah, I'd love to come by, Alan.
Yeah, we'll be at Moscone West. By Broadcast Alley, they call it there. And we'll be doing live video.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, let's make sure we get in there. In the meantime, though, for people who want to find out more about what you and the company are doing, where can we send them?
Yeah, send them over to logarithm.com. You can find out about what we do. And we've also put together a set of resources that help organizations with their own zero trust journey. We don't sell something ourselves that's branded zero trust, but we have been on this journey and hopefully can share some useful insights.
I got it. Logarithm. Chris is CEO now?
The CEO of Logarithm is Mr. Chris O'Malley.
That's right. So give him my regards. I was glad to see Chris go over there. If he's going to be around on RSA, tell him to stop by and see me as well.
I haven't seen Chris since he moved over. All righty.
I certainly will.
All right. Andrew Hollister from Logarithm here talking Zero Trust with us on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. I'm excited to talk to you about securing your software supply chain using Argo CD, Open Policy Agent, Open GitOps, Kyverno, and a project called SIG Cosign. And this is, I titled this talk Secure by Default with GitOps, because this is a way of creating a kind of policy-driven approach to security where you don't necessarily have to check everything as part of your kind of build process, because you have mechanisms in place that are going to make sure that things are enforced at every level. And one of the deficiencies, I think, of CI/CD in the past has been that you have maybe policy engine as part of a pipeline, but then not a way of actually enforcing that beyond that. So if somebody were to bypass the CI/CD pipeline, they get around it. So this is going to be a default security, creating a default security using these really cool tools. All of these are open source tools you can use. So to kick this off, let me introduce myself. My name is Dan Garfield. I am the co-founder and chief open source officer of CodeFresh. We are a software delivery company. We are the Argo Enterprise company. We have a lot of expertise implementing GitOps, implementing Argo, implementing CI/CD, implementing software delivery. We've been around for about 5 or 6 years and been very proud of this team and what we've built. So definitely check out our platform, because we have some really great tooling for you to use to deploy software and deliver it securely and at scale, making your developers productive, all those kinds of things. You can follow me on Twitter at @todaywasawesome. And then I am a maintainer on the Argo project. Now, truthfully, I don't write that much code. Every once in a while, I do a little bit of code contribution. Most of the work that I'm doing is helping organize and organize contributions from our developers, helping organize in the community, helping build our community events and all those kinds of things. So while I do contribute every once in a while in the code base, most of the work that I'm doing is in the community side of things and on helping organize work and build governance and all this kind of stuff. I'm also a maintainer, co-founder, and co-chair on Open GitOps and the GitOps Working Group. So this is a group that we created under the CNCF to create standards and principles around GitOps. You can check it out at opengitops.dev. So with that, when I was a kid, I had a little bit of a side business, fixing computers, setting up networking, doing these kinds of things. And one of these jobs actually paid me in a laptop. And so for the first time as a teenager, I couldn't drive yet. I had a laptop. I had mobile computing. It was blew my mind. Battery would last about 40 minutes. And so what I would do is I would go out on my skateboard and allegedly, I'm not saying I did this, I'm saying allegedly, I would go out with my skateboard, I'd put in my headphones with my laptop, and I would have it ping and tell me when there were Wi-Fi networks. And allegedly, I would use my laptop to see if there was a way that I could bypass these. And a lot of people, if you're familiar with this era, there was WEP encryption. And basically what you could do is you could get in the middle of the Wi-Fi router and the clients, and you could trigger the reauthentication, the reissuing of keys, and then you could snoop on that traffic and you could use it to steal the Wi-Fi password. Now, I'm not saying I did this. I'm saying allegedly I skateboarded around and did this. So this is not an admission of guilt that could be used in a court of law. I want to be very clear about that. But what this taught me is that when it comes to security, if you can get into the middle of a process, you can usually own the process. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be trying to solve a couple of problems. So the first problem is, do you know where your software comes from? It's 8 o'clock at night. Do you know where your software comes from? And the challenge here is most processes that we have involve us building artifacts, pushing them to registries, and then later referencing those artifacts, pulling those from the registries and having them deployed. Now, if someone were able to get in the middle and put something and replace your artifact, you might not know about it. You might deploy something that has a vulnerability into it. At the same time, if you baked the image originally and signed it with vulnerabilities, you also have problems. So that's problem number one. There's actually a way that we can make sure that these things haven't been intercepted. And there's also ways that we can make sure that maybe a programmer who has access, maybe their machine is compromised. We can make sure that they can't necessarily push artifacts that are going to be valid and deployed into our servers. And this is also a use case that I've seen in the real world. In the wild, I've seen a company that had a software engineer had their machine compromised. They clicked on a phishing email, it installed a little bit of a rootkit, and then suddenly they started injecting, they basically just started injecting a bunch of malicious code into every code base that they had access to. The engineer had no idea. So you can actually catch stuff like this with this security approach that we're going to talk about. The second problem that we're going to try to solve is how we enforce rules on our cluster. So a lot of people approach this with training. They try to enforce automation and they try to have audits. I have really interesting conversations with people sometimes where they'll say things like, oh, we never touch things in production by hand. That would be out of process. People know not to do that. So we know it doesn't happen. And I love this level of trust that we have for each other. I mean, it just must be a wonderful organization, so utopian that you don't have anybody bypassing the rules. I actually saw a company who had a similar approach years ago. Unfortunately, they had to go through some layoffs, and the team that was maintaining a core piece of software had been laid off. And suddenly, a month later, that service went down. So when people went to go debugging and figure out what's going on, they found out that none of the code changes had been checked in over the last 8 months. Suddenly the debug challenge went from 10 to 100. So it's really good to have audits in place and have processes in place that literally don't allow for people to bypass the right way to do things. And certainly you might have some sort of break glass procedure that involves multiple people getting involved, but you want to make sure that the default path is for people to do things the correct way. That's what this talk is about, doing things correctly by default. And there's another interesting data point for you. A study was done to figure out how they could get more people to opt in to being organ donors. Donating organs saves a ton of lives. It's super important. And if more people donate organs, more people's lives will be saved. So what they did is they started saying, do you want to opt in? And then when they said, do you want to opt out? The default was to donate your organs. Suddenly everybody was willing to donate their organs because if people had to think about it to opt in, they were more hesitant than if they had to opt out. So doing things by default, it works. And the third thing is kind of related. GitOps is really powerful. And GitOps, if you're not familiar with this is the idea, and there are principles on this that I mentioned, opengitops.dev. You can go through and review these principles. Now, for those of you that are not aware of OpenGitOps or the GitOps standard, or maybe you've heard of GitOps, it basically has 4 principles. Your state needs to be defined in a declarative format. So most people are using Terraform. They're like, hey, I checked that box. I'm feeling great. I'm using YAMLs, manifests, things like that, feeling great. 2, it needs to be versioned and immutable. This is where we start to see people stumble because maybe they use something like a floating tag in their manifest, so it's no longer versioned, or even though they are checking into Git, they're not following best practices to keep those things version immutable. It needs to be pulled automatically. That means you need a software agent that is consistently checking what the desired state of truth is as defined in Git. And then it needs to be continuously reconciled, which means it needs to be aware of what's happening in production and the actual state, and then constantly comparing that against the desired state. And if you can do those two things and have a reconciliation policy, you can do GitOps. And that's fundamentally different than the way that we've delivered software with CI/CD that maybe relies on a webhook. Now, you can still use a webhook as part of this process. You just can't rely on the webhook. So how do we make sure that people are doing this? There's some great tool training out there that we put out that is a GitOps certification using Argo CD course. And it has 2 levels, GitOps fundamentals and GitOps at scale. I think we have over 13 or 14,000 students this year alone. It's the most popular, fastest growing training certification in the world, bar none. And it is quite excellent if I do say so myself. So go to learning.codefresh.io to check that out. But I wouldn't say that we should rely entirely on it. So the first step, when it comes to security, training is the first step. It is not the last step. Okay. So we're going to go into those other steps that we can take. So approaching security, we want to verify our software supply chain. We want to enforce security policy, and we want to do it all with GitOps. So I'm going to show you how to do this using SigStore Cosign. SigStore is a project within the CNCF, and Cosign is an excellent tool they put out, which allows us to sign images to verify their provenance. We actually just implemented this in the Argo project. So all of those images starting with 2.4, 2.5 in Argo CD, those are now signed. So to use this, it's pretty easy. There's a command line utility. So you run cosign, generate key pair. And in this case, I'm specifying that it go into my Kubernetes cluster. So this is going to generate a key that is going to be in my Kubernetes cluster that's available for, and this is the cluster that I use for building things. So I can verify that an image was built using that cluster because the keys are only stored and only created on that cluster. So once I've got that key created, I can then sign an image and upload it to a registry. So I could do that manually on the command line if I have access to the keys. I also created, for everybody's benefit, a tool in the CodeFresh workflow template library. So if you're not familiar with this, let's just go look at it really quick. This is the CodeFresh Argo Hub, or rather, it's the CodeFresh Hub for Argo, as you can see. And in here, I created this workflow template. So if you're using Argo workflows to build images and you want to sign them, you can just grab this workflow template off the shelf, throw it into your workflow, and you're good to go. So this is a template that's free and available for you to use at codefresh.io/Argo Hub. So let's go back. And once you've done that, you can put it into your workflow template, and you can see here an example of how that was done. You can see we basically just pass in the cosign keys. These are pulled from a secret. And then in the template, it just references which image needs to be signed and the tag needs to be signed. And then we need to make sure that we have our Docker config mounted, because this is going to allow us to push it to the registry that is there. All right. So once we've done that, we have another tool that we're going to use called OPA. Now, many people are familiar with OPA, but they're not familiar with OPA Gatekeeper. So OPA stands for Open Policy Agent, and it is a very popular general purpose security policy engine. So it gained a lot of popularity off of Istio and its implementation with Envoy Proxy, because you can set policies for how OPA deals with those kinds of things. So for example, you can basically set firewall rules on the service level and things like that. This is a graduated CNCF project. It's very well baked. It has a ton of tooling. It's very excellent. Now, it's a newer implementation of OPA is OPA Gatekeeper. This is a Kubernetes controller that sits on your Kubernetes cluster, and you can give it policy, and it will check using injection webhooks to make sure that those policies are implemented. So you can do things like, say, make sure that this image is signed before it's allowed onto the cluster. So that's going to be a tool that we're going to be using. We can also, there's a ton of policies available at github.com/open policy agent gatekeeper library, and they include things like protecting specific namespaces, preventing privileged containers, blocking and allowing image repositories, ensuring requests and limits are set, limiting how many replicas there are, blocking wildcards, all kinds of stuff. And you can actually write your own in a language called Rego, which I wasn't that familiar with. Rego is a little tricky to learn, but because the library is so large, I feel like OPA Gatekeeper is a great resource and a great one to use. So the way this is going to work is when we make changes, Argo CD, I didn't even introduce you to Argo CD. If you're not familiar with Argo CD is a tool that's part of the Argo project. And Argo CD basically lets you set as a policy, this is an application, this is where I want it deployed to, this is where its manifests are from. So you define the source of truth from Git and the destination in a cluster, and then Argo CD will follow the policy, make sure those are kept in sync. You can say if something changes in my actual state, I want you to override it with my desired state from Git, and that's called auto-healing, self-healing. And then you can also have it do things like pruning. So when I delete something in Git, I want it to automatically be deleted from my resources, and you can basically set policies around that. So we're going to be using Argo CD as our GitOps engine, our GitOps operator, if you will. And what we're going to do is when we make a change, Argo CD is going to apply those manifests to the Kubernetes cluster. That's going to trigger an admission webhook for OPA Gatekeeper to review policy and apply constraints. So there are two components to OPA Gatekeeper. There are policy templates. These are things like I want to check namespaces for some criteria. And then a constraint is the actual policy itself. It says, check against this policy template, which checks namespaces. And these are the values that I'm looking for. And then once it's reviewed those things, if it passes, then OPA Gatekeeper will pass it on to the scheduler, and Kubernetes will continue deploying it. If it doesn't meet policy, it's going to be rejected. So I mentioned that OPA library exists, which is a huge library of policy templates. And these are implemented each one as a CRD, so as a custom resource definition. And you can see that I actually sync them using Argo CD. So I just have a customization that references the OPA library, and then Argo CD takes that and renders these and deploys them into my cluster for OPA Gatekeeper to use. So let's do some demos here. Let's use OPA Gatekeeper to apply some policies. So let's see if I remember how to do this demo. So I've got a couple of policies that I want to apply. No floating tags, only allow images. Actually, before we do this, we need to deploy it. So I'm looking at my cluster here, and you can see I don't have anything deployed other than I've got Argo CD managing itself. I'm using a tool called Argo CD Autopilot. Argo CD Autopilot provides an opinionated, straightforward way of setting up Argo CD in a self-managing way so that everything is recorded in Git, and it goes into Git first, and it's self-managing, and it's awesome. So let me bootstrap my cluster. And when I do this bootstrap of all my components, by default in my repo, I actually had it as part of the normal bootstrap, but for the demo, I wanted to bootstrap it for you. I don't know, because I wanted to be special, I guess. So what I'm going to do is use Argo CD Autopilot, and I've already passed in a Git token and a Git repo in my environment here, so that what this is basically going to do is it's just going to make Git commits for me. So let's actually look really quick at the repository. So you can see this is my repository where I have everything defined, and I have this folder called apps, which is currently empty. Anything in my application folder is going to be synced to is going to generate applications into Argo CD. And what I've done is I've set up an application. I'm going to be setting up an application called Source that is going to pull in the manifests, the application configs from that repo. So I'll show you what this looks like. It'll be more obvious. So I'm going to do app create and source, and then I'm going to specify the app is at this source folder I just showed you under the app configs directory. So this is where I put all my application configurations, and specifically the ones that I want deployed onto OSS Secure, which is the name of the cluster I'm operating on. And the project is also OSS Secure. So when I do this, this is going to just create a commit for me. And that commit is going to generate this configured JSON, which is going to be consumed by an application set into Argo CD. So, shoot, it's happening too fast. So you can see this is now triggering a bootstrap that's happening where there are a bunch of applications that are getting deployed. And this includes my autopilot. This includes my OPA library. Let's look on this page. Here are my OPA constraints, my OPA library. I've got my cosign provider. I've got gatekeeper running. All this stuff is deployed and up and running. And then you can see it's also deployed some of the stuff for my application. So I have a demo accept app and I have a demo reject app that are being applied. Okay, so we've got everything applied on our cluster. And now we've got policies that we can actually test against. So let's go back and look at this demo. And what we'll do is we're going to go into, whoa. Oh yeah, it's in here. Okay, so I've got my OPA gatekeeper. All right, I've got an example deploy.yaml. Let's go into the examples folder here really quick. So I've got an accept Argo CD application. I've got a pod not allowed, and I've got a reject non-Argo CD. So what I'm going to do here is let's make sure that I'm using, make sure I'm using the right cluster. Yep, I'm pointing at my OSS Secure repo that has been generously been provided by our partners at AWS. And by provided, I mean they let us pay for it and demo it. So what I'm going to do is in my example repo here, I've got this pod not allowed. So what I'm going to do is I created a couple of namespaces in here, and I made one that I'm going to apply security policies onto. Now I could apply this onto all of them, but I'm going to be doing the secure namespace. So I'm going to try to deploy this pod not allowed .yaml. So I'm going to do k apply -f pod not allowed in the namespace secure, and I'm going to just do a dry run on the client here. And when I do that, you can see it was created. Oh shoot, was my policy not applied? Well, remember, policy application happens on the cluster, so I can't do a dry run client. I need to do a dry run server. So if I do a dry run server, you'll see that this one actually violates policy. So this says that my gatekeeper denied the request for this to be ingested because this image is using a latest tag. I need to specify a specific version. So I have a policy that's set to reject if anybody tries to deploy something using a latest tag, because that's a floating tag. That would violate my GitOps policies. That would violate my GitOps principles. So I'm not going to allow people to do that. So you can see that's pretty straightforward. It worked very well. When we do it server side, it restricts the resource. When we do it client side, it doesn't, because it's not aware of the injection webhook. That means that if I were to actually try to apply this manifest, it would get rejected. It wouldn't allow it to deploy. So let's talk about cosign with CI/CD. Now this is the big demo. So now that you understand how OPA policy gatekeeper is working and it's enforcing policies, what we want to do is go through a process, and this is what the entire process would look like. And we can trigger all of this. So starting with, we've got two repositories over here. We've got a GitOps repo. That's the one I just showed you. And then we have an app repo. The app repo is where we define our application. So if we go back and look at this, this repository, this repository just contains what is needed to run everything on my cluster. So all of my, if I just ran a tree on this really quick, let's just do that. Let's go over to here. So you can see, there's actually quite a bit in here. So maybe this isn't the best way to display this, but the way that it is organized follows the principles that are put out on repo organization. CodeFresh has a great blog post on this. And basically, we get all of the automatic generated apps are in apps. And then we have our source repo that has 2 different sets, app configs and manifests. All of our manifests are in there. Anyway, so then we have our application repo, which is where these things are actually being generated. I'm using this color-coded app. And basically, whenever I cut a release, I want to trigger the creation of my resources and sign them. So if we look at this process, we trigger CI/CD. This is going to run a build in CodeFresh using Argo workflows in the CodeFresh platform. And it's going to sign the image using cosign, using that workflow template I already showed you. And then it's going to push it to the image registry. Once it's in the image registry, it's available to be deployed to. The next step is I add the release to my GitOps repo. Now, this could be done automatically. Here, I've actually done it manually. But there's a great tool called Image Updater that would write this to Git for me. Once I update the release in my GitOps repo, this will sync it using Argo CD. And first, it creates the applications in Kubernetes. The admission controller runs. It will accept or deny resources, and then it will deploy those resources and report the sync status back, right? If it's allowed. So what does that look like? Let's do it live really quick. So I've got in here my my app repository, and I just cut. The last release I cut was this version 1.01 secure, and this kicked off a CI pipeline. I can show you what that looks like really quick. Just prove to you that we're doing it. Let's just go into it really quick. I'm not going to trigger a new release because I actually haven't made any code changes since the last time I ran this. Sorry. Let me switch over to here. Okay, and I'm going to go into my delivery pipelines. And I'll pull up my release here. So you can see this is the last release I ran, was this 101 secure. Let's just look at this workflow really quick so you can see what it did. The release was triggered by, once I cut the release, this triggered the build. It built my Docker image. It signed the image using cosign. There's nothing to display here because everything ran properly. And then it ran some report information, did some image enrichment, which is just native into CodeFresh. And of course, all that was pushed into GitHub. All right, so the first part of the demo for that is complete. The next part was to trigger the release. So let's actually look at that really quick. So to trigger the release, if I go over to my GitOps repo and I look at my manifests for my demo accept app, and I look at what's supposed to be deployed for OSS Secure, you can see I've got this customization here, and this is specifying what image should be deployed. Now, I've actually already updated it to colors version 1.0.1/secure. Now, if I were to change this to an insecure release like blue, purple, or yellow, this would be rejected. So if we go back and look in here really quick, you can see that we have a demo app that's been rejected. Let's find out why this was rejected really quick. And if we look at the events in here, we'll see that this one was failed because we tried to deploy an image that was from a repository that is not in the accepted list. So we verified that it's coming from the right repository, and this one wasn't allowed. In my demo accept application, you can see that it's currently running, looks like it's doing a canary, it has done a canary release and completed. Let's go ahead and trigger a new one, and let's send, you can already see that it's deploying properly when we do a secure image. Let's do an unsecure image. So we'll just change this to blue, go blue. It's not secure, lol. And we're just going to commit that directly for the sake of demo speed. So this will, there's actually no webhook set up from the Git repo here. You could, but it doesn't rely on one. So within, 30 seconds or so, it'll pick up and see that a change has happened, and it will trigger the deployment to go. So this approach is pretty awesome because it lets you do things like make sure that people can't deploy images that weren't built where you expected them to be built. So here you can see this has triggered the resource group. Now, because I'm using Argo 2.5, this does server-side apply. So that means when it tried to create this resource group, we got the event right away. Hey, this is not allowed. In this case, this was blocked because it was checking for the image verification and there was no signature on this. So this was blocked and was picked up. Now, because I'm doing a canary release, all of my service, there's been no service disruption here. And in this case, this one's where he was rejected via the server side apply. Now, prior to Argo CD 2.5, we actually did client apply. So that means that it would have applied it, but then it would have failed in the cluster. Now it would still work. You would actually just see a little bit more spinning on this resource because it would be failing creation. So now this is going to be stuck in a progressing state because this is never going to progress. So this doesn't trigger a synchronization fail, whereas it would prior to Argo CD 2.5. So let's go ahead and switch that back to a secure release. And let's do this secure tag that I've already set up here. Go back to being secure. Let's commit that. We'll go back to Argo CD. And now I'm just going to hit refresh on it to trigger the refresh immediately. And you can see now this has been applied. This new resource looks like it's been applied. Oh, wait, is this? Oh, this is just the past one. Oh, so it's still going to create it. Let's just trigger synchronization really quick. Oh, well, actually, it's already deployed. It's this one. Sorry, so that's not a great demo. So let's do, since we already deployed it, let's switch to the other secure image that I have. Because it's not going to trigger the canary release. Switch to diff secure release. Because I already had it deployed before. So it was just sitting in the canary release. So it was like, yeah, everything looks great now because you already had it deployed. So you're just saying that you want to go back to the one that we already have deployed. Everything's fine. So now when we sync it, we'll actually trigger a new resource, a new rollout to trigger with a new replica set. And you can see these pods rolled out just fine. And this is going to go through its canary release. So this will be tested and it will move forward as it's ready. Okay. So we just demoed that. So using OPA with Argo CD, couple of things to mention here. So I tend to think of in Kubernetes, there's kind of two kinds of resources. These aren't official, but I call some fragile. These are resources that once they're started broken, they will always stay broken. And a good example is if you deploy an ingress before an ingress provider, it will get the wrong information on it and it will never be fixed. And then I think there are resilient resources. These are, if failures occur, they will eventually correct. So a great example of this is if you try to apply a resource with a custom resource, but that custom resource definition has not been applied, it will fail. But as soon as the CRD is added, that custom resource will deploy just fine. And that will just take place automatically based on Kubernetes retries. It might take a long time. Maybe you should have better policy around it, but it'll work. So there are tools within Argo CD. One is called sync waves, and this allows you to set the order in which resources are applied. And the other is retry. Retry basically lets us set a policy for when and how often Argo CD should retry applying a resource. So within our group, because we're relying on admission controllers, admission webhooks through Open Policy Agent, that means every resource is potentially fragile when it comes to applying security policy. Let me explain that differently. If I'm trying to apply a security policy to a new resource, I have to make sure that that security policy exists on the cluster before I try to deploy the new resource, right? So this is most important when you're doing a bootstrap, and I'll show you how I did it on here. If you're using, just one other thing. Use retry on policies because the policies themselves are resilient. They only require that the templates exist for the policies. So we talked about those two things that were on the cluster. And we also want to make sure that the policies are applied before any other applications. So to do this, we're going to need to monitor app sync status. And this does work with multiple providers. So if you're using OPA Gatekeeper or Kyverno or something else, that will work as well. And you can run audits, and 2.5 Argo CD works best. But before 2.5 will work okay. You'll just get different kinds of errors when policies are enforced. So to do sync waves, I recommend following this blog written by Christian. You can follow him on Twitter at Christian814. But this blog, Argo CD Application Dependencies, allows us to set the order in which applications are synced. So what I've done is, and we bootstrapped this earlier, I have a app of apps pattern in Argo CD. Basically, this is an application that references 2 additional applications, and one I called system requirements and one I called user space. Everything in system requirements has to be deployed before anything in the user space, because system requirements includes all of my policies. To enable this is pretty easy. Starting in Argo 1.8, Argo CD 1.8, we removed this functionality and made it optional. But basically what we can do is we can say that when we're deploying an app of apps, by default, if this one failed, it would still try to apply this one. So we want to prevent that. So what we can do is basically we enable health checks on Argo CD applications, and we basically say this is a blocking operation. If system requirements isn't applied fully, I don't want user space applied. So you can enable that with this config map, which is explained in the blog post I mentioned a second ago. If you're using it with Argo CD Autopilot, here's an example of what that code would look like to inject that into your manifest. And you can also find this in the OSS secure repo that I was showing you earlier. And then we can use sync waves for these apps. So sync waves specify the order. So under my system requirements application, I have sync wave 1. And under my user space, I have sync wave 2. That means everything has to be applied in my system requirements group of applications, which includes my policies and all that stuff, before my user space stuff can be applied, which is my demo applications. So I showed you what that looks like. Yeah, we just did this. So we don't need to do that again. Let's move on to the next thing. So another thing you can do is you can prevent resources from being created that were not created using Argo CD. So this is a policy that I created inside of Gatekeeper, and the policy template exists out there. It's referenced in here, and then all I do is basically I say check for these annotations, and the annotation I'm looking for is the tracking ID that is set by Argo CD. Now you need to enable this level of resource tracking using Argo CD. Here I set it on service and pod. This is actually incorrect. It should be on deployment and replica set and things like that, because the pod doesn't actually set a tracking ID. But by doing this, I can make sure that nobody deploys an application outside of Argo CD. So since I already demoed what it looks like when you apply a resource and it doesn't work, that's pretty, you probably don't need to see it again. But there you go. Bonus tip, Kyverno. We haven't talked that much about Kyverno. Kyverno is a competitor to OPA Gatekeeper, and it has some additional things that now for this demo, I actually used OPA Gatekeeper and Kyverno. I actually have Kyverno checking my image signing, but then I have Gatekeeper checking my other policies. You can use both. You could use just one. I just found that I wanted to do a demo that included both, so I included both of them, and they work fine together. Now, Kyverno does work a little bit differently because Kyverno actually mutates resources when it applies policy. And this means that if you don't do something, Argo CD will get in a fight with Kyverno. Argo CD says, apply these manifests. Kyverno says, looks great. I've added this information. Argo CD says, where did that information come from? That's not defined in Git. Overwrite that information and remove it. Kyverno says, hey, something just changed, so I need to add my policy information up here. Argo CD says, where did that information come from? And so on and so forth. So we can actually fix this by doing a couple of things. Basically, we can add an ignore differences section that and set a cluster policy that ignores all of the components that are auto-generated by Kyverno. So those will not trigger resynchronization. So you can do that here. The instructions are in the blog post that are linked at the bottom of the slide. And the slides, are, of course, are going to be provided at the end. So what did we accomplish? Well, we verified our software supply chain, right? We made sure the images were built in the place that they were built. We made sure that was enforced using our open policy agent in Kyverno and Argo CD. We implemented it all with Argo CD to give us a much better enforced security policy. People can't get around these things now. It's just default. It's going to work this way, and it's going to reject you. It's going to reject your release if you try to do something outside of process. If you try to deploy something not using Argo CD, you try to deploy something manually, we can actually reject that. And we could reject any kind of resource that people were trying to deploy that way. And we did it with 100% GitOps. Everything was in Git. And so you can follow along. If you want to go and implement this yourself, you can take my repository that we just looked at, this OSS Secure repository. You can bootstrap this onto your own cluster, just name it OSS Secure, and you can bootstrap everything that I did right here, and it will all work exactly the same. Tons of resources that I use for this. So use the project repo, Argo CD Autopilot I mentioned. You can check out all the rest of these great resources after the talk. And of course, as always, go get certified. This slide says over 10K students. It's out of date. It's over like 14,000 this year alone. Argo CD, codefresh.io/argo/get-certified or learning.codefresh.io get you to the same place. And we have GitOps fundamentals and Argo CD at scale are both available. With that, I would take questions, but I think we're out of time. So hit me up on Twitter @TodayWasAwesome. I would love to hear from you. Also, go check out CodeFresh. We have an amazing software delivery platform that takes advantage of all this stuff and makes it easier, especially to do at scale, especially to do within a large organization. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much for coming.
Hey, everybody. I'm Tim Styling from ConnectAll.
Hi, I'm Soumya Menon from ConnectAll, and welcome to our session on DevOps cartography, why value stream mapping is key for agile software delivery. So before we begin, just wanting to let you know that if you have any questions during the session, do put it in the chat box and we will answer them towards the end. So let's begin today's session with a short story. So you would have heard versions of this story. It's called 5 Monkey and a Ladder Story. A lot of business leaders, management gurus actually quote this story to understand organizational behavior. But in this case, let's get to the story. So it's about 5 monkeys who are put in a cage and there's a ladder with some bananas on top of it. So one of the monkeys tries to climb up the ladder and tries to get to the bananas, but it is immediately sprayed with icy water. And it is shocked, and the rest of the monkeys are shocked as well. But this continues, and the next monkey tries climbing up and is also sprayed with icy water. Eventually, what happens is that the monkeys understand that there's a consequence to climbing up the ladder, so they try not to do that. And after some time, the researchers replace one of the monkeys with a new monkey who's not aware what's happening inside the cage. The other monkeys don't know that this is a new monkey. This monkey tries to climb up again to get to the bananas. And even before it climbs up the stairs, the rest of the monkeys try and pull it down or fight with it and try to basically block that kind of a behavior. Now, what does this mean? Does this sound very familiar? It does, I'm sure. It happens with all of us. This is basically, it brings us to a blind spot, which is the follow the herd mentality. We all get into this pattern of doing things the way it is always done. What this does is it gives us no space for innovation. You may fall into this routine that directly affects business. So within your teams, within your DevOps teams as well, think about it. When you follow a certain pattern, there is no visibility into processes, into data, into workflows, into even root causes, or even whether your work is adding value or not. Right? And you don't even look at your processes from an improvement perspective, and you get blindsided by this routine. Now, what has this got to do with DevOps, Tim?
Yeah, so I think just to even provide some additional context and tie it back to what we're talking about here at the conference, let's take a look at some statistics. So this is from the 2021 State of DevOps report. And some of the stats that you see here are very interesting. So 83% of folks that were surveyed said that their organizations are implementing DevOps. So they're currently doing it. And of those 83%, 78% of those folks said that their organizations are, quote, stuck in mid-level DevOps evolution. So what that says is that they're not just getting started, and they may not be where they want to be quite yet, but they're kind of in the middle. And one of the quotes that I got from this report is essentially saying that organizations that are in the process of doing DevOps, a lot of the organizations that are currently implementing some of these practices, they're not really talking about it anymore. It's just simply how they work. And some of the reasons for that, as we think about it, are very understandable. We've been at this for over a decade now. And so over the last 10 plus years, what once was revolutionary and different and unique is now simply the way that we're doing things. It's mainstream. It's just kind of the way that things are around here. Just like another process at work, something that, if somebody new comes in, that's just the way it's done. And everyone encourages that behavior. And so what is the problem with that? What's the issue, Samya?
Well, you tend to become complacent, isn't it? I mean, you constantly do something the way it is always done. Like you said, you don't even know whether it has a name at all. And this unintentionally hinders the way you deliver software. And what does this mean? It means that you might end up with a leaky DevOps pipeline. You have no visibility into the kind of activities that you're doing. You automate all the time without understanding why you're doing this. There's limited transparency. There's no governance or compliance in place. There's silos, definitely. And there's a lot of waste that gets mounted because you're not looking at the non-value added activities that are probably costing your company time and money. And when you're unable to, connect your disparate tools, because the DevOps pipeline has so many tools, there is a lack of an architecture, and there's lack of interoperability between these tools, and you're unable to capture the data or map the data that goes across these tools. And this is a huge problem, this pattern within the DevOps pipeline. So how do you break this pattern, Tim?
Yeah, so what we're not saying is that DevOps is terrible and needs to be thrown away. No, we don't want to do that. DevOps is a great practice. It's a great way to look at your organization. But what we are suggesting is that value stream management can be used alongside DevOps to take a look at our DevOps pipeline, take a look at our software delivery processes, and make sure that we're doing it in the right way. Constantly have an eye on things with the goal being a consistent improvement. So continuously getting better and better and better, so that we can get closer and closer to the continuous development that we want with our DevOps pipeline. So as we think about value stream management, we first have to lay the groundwork of what is a value stream. And according to the Gemba Academy, they classify a value stream as all of the value-added and non-value-added steps that are required to get from raw materials to delivering a product to a happy customer. Now, note that there's nothing in this definition about software delivery or DevOps. This can be as applicable for any industry or even any activity that we do. As an example, when I got up to get my coffee this morning, there was a value stream. There were activities that I had to do in order to get to that point where I'm enjoying a delicious cup of coffee. Or as we look at something from a business in another industry, there are certain activities that are required to take a chunk of metal and a bit of rubber and walk it through the processes required to deliver a Ford F-150 to a happy driver. Now, as we think about managing the value stream, there are 3 critical steps. You have to see the value stream, measure the value stream, and automate the value stream so that you can effectively manage it. And the first step, as we think about seeing the value stream, is done best with value stream mapping. Now, what's value stream mapping? Also, according to Gemba Academy, it's a process we use to document, analyze, and improve flow. And so as we think about that example with the Ford F-150, and really any manufacturing example, it's very easy to see the flow. You can take a walk on the factory floor, check out how each of those pieces of material is moving through the process, and whether worked on by a person or a machine, there are very definite processes that we can see to take things from that raw material into an awesome looking truck. You can physically see the flow. And so a value stream map in that context may look something like this. You have the supplier providing the raw materials, and you have the customer enjoying the finished product, and all of the steps in between and how long each of those take. Now, in software delivery, things are a little different. we can't just walk out into the office and see the flow of information, because instead of being on an assembly line, it's in our tools, it's on the internet, and today it's not even all in the same place. If I'm creating a plan that Samya then has to develop, we're not in the same building anymore. We're in different parts of the world. So how do we start to do that? How do we start to see what that process looks like? Well, as we think about a software delivery focused value stream map, it may look a little like this. You'll see the flow of information from the beginning of the process through development and into deployment, and all of the steps that are required to get it from that initial ideation all the way through delivery to the happy customer. So, this is something that it does require some effort to build. It does require looking into understanding your value stream. So why bother with it, Samya? What's in it for the audience?
Great question, Tim. In fact, you may even ask why and how to use value stream mapping or value streams within DevOps, right? To understand that, so what is DevOps is all about continuous delivery and continuous improvement. And value streams gives you that visibility into everything that you're putting in or taking out of the value stream. So when you combine these two forces together, you basically get visibility into everything that you're doing, from build, deployment, and managing workflows. It begins from SDLC lifecycle all the way through quality assurance and release and operations, right? So it helps you identify bottlenecks and pain points, manage errors and defects such as bugs. It gives you visibility and traceability into your entire lifecycle. And more than anything, you eliminate those redundant processes and wasteful activities within your pipeline. And because you're connecting all the tools and the people, especially who are managing these tools, who are behind this, the humans, that is, you understand the connection between all of this. This improves cross-functional collaboration within your CI/CD pipeline. It gives you opportunities for automating meaningfully, right? And you also get data that you can use for metrics and analytics as well. So it's a great way to start your lean practice. And anyway, DevOps is a practice that has roots in agile and lean principles as well. So this is where you begin. But how do you get started, Tim?
Yeah, great question. So as we think about, once we have the value stream map, what do we do with it? And how do we use it to understand our work and start to optimize? Well, as we take a look at our work, each individual step falls into one of three categories. It's either value added, so it's something that's directly delivering value to the customer. It's non-value added, but essential. So it's something that we have to do in our process. Something, as an example, if we have a step that is required for compliance, customer doesn't care about that, but we have to do it. It's essential. It's a necessary activity. Perhaps there's some reporting we have to provide. Well, that's non-value added, but essential. And then there's non-value added, non-essential activity. This is the waste. These are the things that are simply a waste of time and money and don't deliver any value to the customer, nor deliver any value to the process in general. So what do we think about, and how do we respond and use that classification to optimize? If it's a value-added activity, we can standardize things so that we can streamline it as best as possible. If it's non-value-added essential, let's seek to minimize some of those activities so we're not spending as much time on them, but we're still making sure that we meet the quality standards that we have. And then finally, for non-value-added, non-essential, just cut them. They're a waste of time and they don't deliver any value. So as we take a look at a hypothetical value stream map and we start to think about how we would address this, we could start by eliminating a non-value added activity. This central document that we've always been maintaining in Microsoft Word, all the information is held elsewhere. So that updating of this centralized document is simply a waste of time. That can be eliminated and we can gather the information from another source if needed. We can also start to minimize some of the manual security activities that we have in order to free up time for that team. We can think about how to automate some of those manual activities with a tool like SonarQube as an example. We can also seek to empower and train our tier 2 support in order to be able to escalate tickets themselves from ServiceNow to Jira, which then frees up our tier 3 support so that they can use their expertise in other parts of the value stream and to help work on some backlog items and possibly eliminate some bottlenecks that we're facing. And then finally, we could even consider adding a feedback loop for customer estimates. And while this may even add an extra step to our development process, the benefit that we get from keeping the customers happy and satisfied and in the loop is well worth it. So we talked about how value stream mapping can be used to see the value stream. And actually here in the chat, we're going to share a URL for a free tool that you can use to do that. But what about measuring and automating? Well, just as the obligatory product plug here, that's something a value stream management platform like ConnectAll can help with. So we have the Value Stream Insights side of our product that allows you to harvest data directly from the value stream and then display it on a metrics dashboard. And then we also have the automation part of our platform, which allows you to take action and connect your tools in a way that allows you to automate the flow of work. So you want to land the plane for us here, Samya?
Absolutely. I hope all of you understood how value stream mapping is going to benefit all of you within DevOps and to create an agile working environment. So mapping is the first step to value stream management, but it's the first step that any team needs to take to implement lean practices, right? So identifying the people, the tools, the connection between them, all of this improves collaboration. You can connect and communicate with your teams better and ultimately add more value. And what is it that we are all looking for to improve, right? So there's continuous improvement that comes in. And this is a great way to begin. And like Tim said, we do have a free value stream designer tool at valuestreammanagement.com. We would love for you to register. And to get you started, we also have a workshop that's coming up at the end of November that Tim is going to be conducting, which is specifically for all you DevOps folks on value stream mapping. And we want you to get your hands dirty, build your own value stream map, and learn a lot about it during that workshop as well. I hope you all enjoyed this session. And if you do have questions, do ask us and we will attend to them as well. You can connect with us. Our details are up on your screen. I hope you all had a great session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Is Techstrong TV.
Well, the great pleasure of being joined again by Manoj Nair. Manoj is Chief Product Officer with Snyk. Welcome.
Hey, Mitch. Good to talk to you again.
It's been a long time since Vegas, right? Now we're back to the virtual conversations, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Really enjoyed talking with you there. By the way, that conversation is on Techstrong TV. I'll put a link to it in the description when we air this one. Well, folks that may not know you, would you introduce yourself, tell us about your role and a little bit about Snyk? I know we're going to jump into that further.
Yeah, no. So I'm Manoj Nair. I'm Chief Product Officer here at Snyk. We're a company focused on developer security. Really, companies origins are really focused on flipping that equation. Finding issues is really what a lot of the security-minded tools were doing. I've spent a lot of time in the security space, and gone through the pluses and the minuses of all those approach. And it was kind of one of the things about Snyk is we're empowering developers to fix issues before they actually end up, becoming an issue. And that's one of the big missions that we're very focused on here.
In the era of DevOps and DevSecOps, right? So let's have the developers do security. Well, there's a big part, of course, that they play in all of that. love to have you talk about that. We've chatted before about one, at least for me, the differentiators around Snyk is developers know it's a product, it's a tool, it's a set of technologies that were created for developers. They can tell that it's not another security product meant for security people. They want developers to use. And I think that's extremely important because developers know when it's not something that's going to impede or help what they're doing, and that makes a big difference when you're a developer.
Yeah, as a former developer, I should probably have a shirt that said I used to code. I don't anymore. I think that the rest of the team thanks me for that. But I remember not liking the static analysis tools and others. They're just noisy. They're were looking took too long, and they weren't really providing accuracy. One of the fundamental things we have really focused on from the origin is developers should not have to change how they work. They have enough complexity in the DevSecOps SDLC tool chain, and they have the tools that they live in. So how do you provide value in that context? And part of it is a culture change too. It's it's almost like product management. You provide the developers the why, and they'll go build the right stuff. And here we're providing the why and the context of what is the security issue right where they live in the IDE, when they do the PR checks, providing education, awareness, and then automation. So productivity is the other thing devs care about. So one is empowering them and then making the life easy. So here's an automatic ability to fix it, and the fixed PR is integrated into their workflow. The tests are built into their build system. You don't have to change your build system. So these were some of the very important original innovations, and we have this developer lab, and that continues to be something that we very, very importantly focus on, but then provide the best security intelligence. And so, that combination has really kind of created this, we believe we're empowering DevSecOps, right? The DevOps change has happened over the last 4, 5, 6 years, but DevSecOps adoption is still at its early stages. And that bridge is really what we're empowering.
Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about sort of the IDE integration and other things that obviously scanning can happen either locally or when you're checking code in a CI/CD process or into a repository. What are the other things that Snyk is doing sort of at that developer experience that's part of their workflow?
Yeah, today the developer workflow, if you think about the original stack and you kind of packaged applications, and after that, an IT team and a security team took over, it's no longer the case, right? So when you look at it, we have modern software is composed. It's not coded. There's a lot of open source, and all those dependencies and understanding what vulnerabilities they could bring and putting it in a risk context. So, it's at the time of packaging and using the right open source libraries and continuously making sure that there aren't new issues found there. The first party code and we created 100x speed differentiation in how do you do first party code analysis that makes it possible to do real time recognition in the IDE. But then it doesn't stop there. They're responsible for the packaging in containers and microservices, and there are potential vulnerabilities that can come there just in terms of choosing the right base image, or should this container join that cluster, and admission control. So there's everything about the containerized environment. Kubernetes is how a lot of modern microservices applications are developed. So we have a solution around that. And then you think about the final deployment, and also the dev persona now through these processes changed. You got the developer building the code, the platform engineer who might be responsible for packaging and the creating the Terraform templates, and just within there, how can we give the same context on the IAC templates as they've been created? And we further extended it to the cloud. So now when the platform engineer is, let's say, making a change in an S3 bucket policy, maybe that is okay because there's some other mitigating control in their cloud deployment. They don't have false positives. So not only do we give them context on their policies and their deployment templates, we're telling them, hey, here's your cloud deployment and continuously assessing that. Or there are things like ClickOps where you might have a deployment template, but somebody goes to the cloud console, changes it. What we call it is a connected code to cloud and back to code. So this context, we're able to take all the way through in where all these different types of developers are living. And in a connected way, allowing them to bring risk down before it actually manifests in a production environment.
It's a really good point. I'm glad you brought platform engineering into it. Obviously, a relatively new or an evolved role, increasing role in this. But from the developer standpoint, part of this complexity is I might be deploying my code into different environments. It could be multi-cloud, but also could be different configurations, right? I'm running this cluster, Kubernetes configuration for this market, these customers, whatever it is, but that same code, microservice, whatever might be running in something different. And that's a lot of cognitive load for anyone, developer, anyone else, to kind of know that we're doing that, but also keep pace with the change because they don't all of the same parity and configuration changes and all of that.
Yeah, and the modern application is very complex. It's got hundreds of thousands of data points on a single app and how it's composed in the end. So just getting that context in the end, if I'm writing a code here, maybe to your point, it is manifesting itself in maybe a few different app contexts, and the risk might be different in different ones. Right? The other issue is prioritization. Without having that context, all you could have is tools that create a lot of noise along the way. And this kind of become a big, deal in the community. Like one of the reasons why things don't get fixed is it's just so noisy and people get overwhelmed. So connecting it really helps you to also kind of really focus on prioritization, which probably brings, kind of in some of the news that we are going to talk about here too.
Well, let's shift to that because you do have some great news that you announced recently about your collaboration with ServiceNow. Tell us about that.
Yeah, ServiceNow. We're very pleased that ServiceNow joined Snyk as a strategic partner and an investor. So we just announced yesterday a $25 million investment, and that extended our Series G, which was about $200 million coming into the company. So it's a good customer value thing too, but it also shows they see this beyond just a partnership. They see this as a strategic investment and partner that benefits our joint customers. And you think about the customer benefit here, ServiceNow, obviously well known for being a category creator and leader in IT service management. And we talked a lot about dev security and how the world is changing to microservices applications with digital transformation. Every company is becoming a technology company in that sense. And when you look at their workflows, a lot of the IT workflows and the enterprises and all live in this IT service management tools. We talked about the prioritization problem. So great, we have devs fixing things, but how does the IT and security organization get visibility to it? How do they, with an asset management system like ServiceNow, where they might have the business value of an application, that's a nice context to be able to use to do prioritization of risk. So that's really, ServiceNow vulnerability management and our open source product, Snyk open source, is the first integration here we've announced. And that's really about that, increased value, bridging the dev world and the DevSecOps world with the IT and security world, and different people able to continue to live in their context. The devs able to live in their context, the IT teams able to use their workflow, but feeding their information and context across that bridge. And that kind of application risk view of workflows for IT. These are some of the benefits. And it's really about bridging this DevSecOps world and pulling existing organizations forward with the abilities that the joint solution can offer.
I'm interested too. Is this related to any of the acquisitions that ServiceNow, that your relationship's not an acquisition, it's an investment, but they acquired Lightstep, they acquired Era Software, kind of people in the observability, incident management space, some real fantastic talent from that world. Are you going to be working with any of those companies or any of the acquired companies? Or are you kind of working with core Lightstep product? Where do you fit into their ecosystem?
Yeah, it's where we fit in is what ServiceNow calls the ServiceNow vulnerability management capabilities, and that's now some of again the power of we're a platform company. They're connecting observability and some of these signals into their platform capabilities. So there's obviously connections and better context that over time can improve the integration. For example, an observability signal could tell you what's in runtime, right? And that's these are all the possibilities, but right now, the focus is where we're starting is you think about supply chain security. How do you manage that? If you have, I think last time we talked much about S-bombs, and what do you do with that? Where are these assets? Well, these assets typically in most enterprises are kept in an IT asset management system. ServiceNow is the leader there, and they have the workflows around it. So there's a lot of other things that together we can actually help our joint customers with.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to seeing what great things happen with that, and sort of joint ventures and investments and companies partnering. It always seems to me it comes down to where you have mutual shared interest, right? You have customers with you're both contributing to solving the problem for them, as opposed to kind of loose coupled relationships that sort of evolve but move apart over time. But with an investment in you, that's a strong signal. This is more than just let's sign a partner agreement, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's we're pleased to have ServiceNow join a whole bunch of our investors that have committed to Snyk and just making us a generational company here, helping for the entire customer context and applications get more and more secure. And most of the world today is developers who are coding and creating new digital content and IP, and that's kind of the shared mission we have.
Well, and just stepping back for a moment, in this context, this time, what you said, 200 million in your round raise, is that correct in total?
We announced this in December. Was 196.5 was that round, and then we had this additional 25 on top of it is extending that Series G.
That's an accomplishment in and of itself. A lot of folks have had to retrench their strategies on funding given times, but when you've got momentum, you got the product, you've got the market, that's a great sign you can continue that, to have folks invest in you.
Yeah, no, it's something that for us, it's really about continuing to expand the strategic value our customers can get, and it's a really strong endorsement in what Snyk's done so far, but also where we're going with our vision and our capabilities.
One thing I want to touch on, you mentioned in your description, talking about developer productivity. That's risen very high on the prominence of conversations people are having. Just as we think about layoffs at tech companies, and where do we spend our money? And of course, developers are an extremely valuable resource, as are other folks that are part of creating software and securing it. But there is that emphasis of let's make sure we're both enabling developers with tools and technologies that help them and don't get in the way, and also know that they're doing the best work that they can do. At least we're empowering them to do that.
Yeah, I think that if you think about like some of the productivity improvements, and there's good metrics in the DevOps community, DORA metrics. A lot of DevOps teams love to use that, and there's a nice competition between teams, and like, are we DORA elite? And I see that even internally. And you think about those metrics, they're really focused on speed and comes back to how productive are your teams. Now, you think about I'm a Formula One fan, so I like to think about, if I put, speed bumps on the track for the developers who are trying to go fast and be productive and to be more innovative, then that's not really going to allow them to pick up their speed. And that's partly what's happening here with some of the older approaches, where I think about this like these are like checkpoints. Like after the fact, you're scanning, you're finding a bunch of issues. The developer has already moved on. Their context is no longer there. In fact, one of the interesting things we've seen is, after 6 months, even if you wrote the code, it's like you found it somebody else's code, where we're giving you the context right there, and that itself is a huge productivity boost. And developers, would rather not get interrupted while they're off to something else to come back to something that they may or may not remember anymore. And it's all those little innovations we talked about, and you think about like these urgent fire drills. You have the next log for shell with people who have to cancel vacations and get on long Teams calls. Most Snyk customers, like 95% plus of Snyk customers, resolved that all of the issues and knew they were in a good place in less than 48 hours. And, for everyone else, it's like 30 days and lots of, painful activity. So that's productivity. That's the organ, like the entire org has to go into these fire drills. And, these are all examples where we are optimizing dev productivity and the overall organizational productivity.
I like the analogy, the racing analogy, kind of Formula One of where we've been and where we are. You think about all the telemetry data and all the information. The developer doesn't need all of that, right? They need what they need in the moment to, get the best performance out of the car, understand conditions of the car and the track and how everything's are performing and what adjustments they need to make and can make. But they don't want to see everything. They just need what they need to do the best job in the moment and where they're headed, where they're headed down the track, not where they are at that second.
And they're empowered to make the decision then. They're empowered, we're giving them the ability to have speed and stay productive.
Wonderful. Been great talking with you. Congratulations on the investment and the partnership. Look forward to seeing the outcomes of that, and definitely come back and let's get together at the next KubeCon or Vegas or whatever it is. I'm sure we'll be in the same city soon because there's a lot of stuff happening.
I look forward to it, Mitch. Thank you. And thank you to your listeners for the time.
Absolutely. It's been fantastic having you. Manoj Nair, who is Chief Product Officer with Snyk. And I'll put the link into our other interview. Definitely check that out. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. Take care.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Donald Fisher, who's the CEO for TideLift, and we're talking about how to secure that software supply chain that's full of all those open source components. Donald, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
I think when you guys first started talking about this, everybody kind of just nodded their head and said, yeah, that sounds like something we might be concerned about someday. And then lo and behold, we had a bunch of attacks and people started freaking out and even the president got involved. So, looking back on it right now, do you think that we're taking it seriously enough at this point, or are we still talking about it more than we're doing something about it?
Yeah, that's a credible observation there, Mike, that, some of this could have been foreseen. And certainly there have been folks in the industry trying to get ahead of the software supply chain and specifically open source software supply chain challenges that clearly we would face. And now we are facing them. And we've seen episodes like, SolarWinds 2 years ago, Log4Shell about a year ago that have really gotten folks' attention on, folks in any organization that's building or relying on software. And I do think, to your point, that folks are starting to take it more seriously. Certainly, we see organizations prioritizing software supply chain security as one of their cybersecurity priorities, or in many cases, their overall priorities in their businesses today in the private sector. And there's also been a lot of, really good positive energy and specific steps being taken by national governments as well to apply some regulatory pressure here as well to level up industry. Certainly, we've seen some of that in the U.S. and we've seen some of that in Europe and in other jurisdictions as well. So I do think it's starting to get the attention and being taken seriously to the extent that it needs to be as a practical matter.
Whose job is this? Because the consumers of the software kind of assume that the maintainers of the projects have done something about security, and the people who create the software say, hey, this is my weekend hobby. If you're going to use it in a production environment, security is not my problem. So who needs to step up here?
Yeah, great question. So, this is a central question for some of the, regulatory paradigms that are being designed and discussed right now, right? So, where we sit right now, we're awaiting any day now the publication of the U.S. National Cybersecurity Strategy that is mandated by a recent U.S. law that established the Office of the National Cyber Director, et cetera. It called for a specific articulation of the National Cybersecurity Strategy in the U.S. And the policy has not been, or the strategy document has not been published publicly yet, but there's been a lot of chatter about what's in there. There's been some reporting on it. And one of the central kind of new changes that is being discussed in this document is shifting that responsibility from consumers of technology to producers of technology, right? I've seen this said, for example, in an interview last week, Ann Neuberger, who's the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cybersecurity, she said, voluntary efforts have been insufficient against the threat to critical services that Americans rely on, right? So some of this stuff is becoming mandatory. I saw some other coverage of this describe this as shifting liability onto those entities that fail to take reasonable precautions to secure their software, and basically stop relying on market-based solutions to police this and enforce cybersecurity in products and services, and start using, explicit regulatory requirements. A lot of that comes down to who is liable when something goes wrong. And in other domains like pharmaceuticals or critical infrastructure in other areas, it's very clear that the producer, the vendor, is liable. In technology, cybersecurity issues, it's been a lot less clear. It's basically the liability has been borne by the user. So I think we're going to see a shift there. Certainly, the conversation is changing right now.
So a lot of those folks are vendors that have built something that incorporates open source software, and you would expect them to take some responsibility for this. But what about the enterprise that just kind of builds an application using open source components? What's their liability? Because from their perspective, they may not be using that software to sell something. They're just using it to build and run some function.
Yeah, we'll have to see what the the actual text of the policy and then all of the implementation of that policy is over the coming months and probably years it'll take for this to unfold. But it certainly at the heart of what you're asking is a very straightforward matter. Is how can organizations get their arms around the cybersecurity posture of the software that they are assembling? Think about it today. So much of software application development is assembly as opposed to just authoring net new code. When you're assembling software that's been written by other folks, whether they're other organizations that have created software, released it as open source packages that you're downloading and incorporating, or really when you look at most of application development, the packages and the libraries that folks rely on when building applications, most of that doesn't even come from a company. It comes from an individual who's doing that in an open source community. They're doing it for sometimes economic reasons, but often for impact, to contribute their skills and know-how to the world. And certainly as you start to think about the supplier liability part of this conversation, it's one place to apply that question is at the organization that bundles these components. How can they even attest to the standards that meets or not, if they didn't author that code? And then another really interesting question is like, what implications are there for open source creators that are just building something, putting it out there? In a sense, they are becoming, a supplier to all of these organizations, or they already are. Are they going to take on liability? And there's been some, potentially scary implications of some of the discussions that have been happening around software liability in these new cybersecurity policy regimes.
Now, you guys reward maintainers for doing the right security thing. How's that going? And because a lot of folks are they're unclear as to exactly how much responsibility they want to take on.
Yeah. So, at Tidelift, my company, our contribution to this effort is, we basically started with the idea, how can we work with those independent creators behind these open source packages that everybody relies on? And we now work with a network of human creators. These are like indie maintainers. They're folks who open source maintainership is typically not part of their day job. It's something that they're doing on the side. We have partnered with them to ensure that their software, help us assure that their software meets these objective standards that are being asked for by private sector industry and by national governments, right? So the way that we approach this is we go to these open source maintainers and we ask them to align their software development practices to some of these objective standards. Two examples would be one from private industry, the Open Source Security Foundation, which is sort of a consortium of private companies, has proposed what's called the OpenSSF scorecard. It's a bunch of practices that you want any software creator to follow around, secure development of their software. A second example is from the U.S. government, is the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, has published what's called the Secure Software Development Framework, SSDF. Pretty long document detailing all of the practices, that secure development practices that should be applied when building software. At Tidelift, we take standards like those, we go to open source maintainers and we say, hey, we know it's kind of boring and tedious to, check all of these boxes and to follow every last one of these secure development standards, but it's really important to the organizations that rely on your components, that have come to rely on these components that you started developing, putting out there. So we will compensate you. We will pay you money to work with us on behalf of the organizations that are consuming your software, to cause your software to meet these standards, cybersecurity standards, and to attest to us in a kind of high fidelity way that these standards are being met. And then what Tidelift does for the organizations that we work with on the demand side of the equation, folks that are building with these open source components, is we give them a software as a service solution that allows them to apply this human generated knowledge about what standards open source projects do or do not meet to their consumption of those packages. And they can basically configure a policy based on this data coming from the human maintainers of the open source projects to say, in this application area, we have to be really, really, locked down. We're going to apply really, really stringent standards. Every package is going to need to be verified to meet every one of these secure development processes. In other situations, it might not matter as much, right? It might be an internal use case where it doesn't need to be as ultra locked down. There's less of a, less consequences if there's a vulnerability in the code. In that case, they can allow, packages that haven't been entirely verified. So put it succinctly, we're trying to basically align the interests between these organizations that rely on this independently authored and created open source code with the folks who have been creating that code, try to get the rest of the job done that the downstream users require for their own, just kind of self-defense, sensible protection, and also to be able to fulfill some of these mandatory requirements that have emerged.
A lot of organizations might be their own worst enemies. And how do I kind of bring some structure to these things? Because what happens is people download something and they fork it, or they download something from a secure repository one day, but then the next day the other development team is downloading the same code from something that's less secure and we don't know what's in there. How do we bring some adult supervision into this process without getting in everybody's way?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the way that we see that happening in most organizations, mature organizations these days, is by centralizing the software assembly and release and authorship process with a defined pipeline of tools and policies being applied, rather than having every development team, just working ad hoc using random set of tools. Using random inputs as well. So frequently when we're working with organizations who are Tidelif's customers, they've established a centralized DevSecOps pipeline. They've brought together best in breed tools. Sometimes they'll take a fully assembled DevOps pipeline from a vendor that supplies multiple parts. And they'll be looking to have things all the way from a Git source code collaboration environment, a continuous integration testing package there. And this is where Tidelift comes in with the ability to add to that pipeline a formal check about what are the standards that the third-party open source components flowing into your application meet, and basically provide that both guidance and also, if the organization wants to, enforcement of those standards. And then, of course, the kind of the secure packaging, build, release, and the rest of the pipeline to get that into production. So I think that centralizing that activity and having a really, really robust DevSecOps pipeline that the organization as a whole adopts, that allows a way to enforce these policies that now need to be enforced. Just as a slight embellishment on the open source, third-party open source element of that. Typically, the way that we see organizations thinking about this and implementing this is, rather than having every individual developer in the organization responsible for applying policy around each individual open source package, which becomes an intractable problem. It's, many organizations, tens of thousands of developers, tens of thousands of packages. It's kind of chaos. What we see organizations successfully doing is doing that analysis centrally as well as part of this DevSecOps pipeline, establishing a growing catalog of open source components that have been validated to meet certain standards, and then just allowing developers within the organization to draw from that vetted catalog of packages that meet the organization's requirements. That way you take this pretty substantial load off of individual developers who are just trying to build an application to solve a business purpose, arm them with a library, essentially, of vetted open source packages that somebody else has already upstream of them validated will meet their organization's requirements.
Speaking of cognitive load, we're supposed to be having people sign code, and then we're going to generate all these SBOMs that will let people see what's going on inside these packages. Are we really prepared to operationalize all that? Because a lot of folks I talk to are like, well, it's great that we're going to have all these SBOMs, but I have no idea how to manage them.
Yeah, I mean, the whole conversation around these software bills of material or SBOMs, which, I think the more human way to say that is ingredients lists for applications. It's a multi-stage journey, basically, starting with that good idea and having that yield the intended security benefits, right? So step one of that is just being able to, robustly create a comprehensive ingredients list for what you're building. It's actually kind of tricky if you haven't designed that into your process from the beginning, because so many open source, third-party open source components in particular just kind of flow into your application because they're a dependency of a package that you're using. You may never actively take a decision to incorporate those. They kind of get pulled in, the jargon is transitively there. So there's tooling and work to be done to make sure that you can even have a comprehensive list of components. Then there's some tooling and formats for containing that are I think starting to settle down now. But then the big question is, okay, now that you have the ingredients list, what do you do with it, right? By analogy to the food world, your ingredients list is of no use if you don't have a list of allergens that you're looking for to filter out, or if you don't have any kind of assurance as to the process that's being applied to keep those ingredients in good health and quality before it gets incorporated. So where is the database of facts that you can look up about those software ingredients that are flowing into your applications? That's where I think there's this really interesting question about most of those facts can only be known by the actual creators of this software. And in the case of third-party open source software, which is now most of the code that goes into commercial applications of all kinds, we gotta go partner with the open source creators behind it, find a way to align the interests there, and also find a specific, technology mechanism to get that information out of their heads into a format that can be used by organizations who are trying to do something with their software bills of material.
What's your best advice to the folks who are trying to manage all this chaos? Because it seems like their heads could easily explode.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here, and there's a bunch of different regulations that are actually binding this year, starting in the U.S. There's a number of deadlines coming up in throughout 2023 for providing software bills of material, making attestations about the software that you're providing, including third-party components that are going into that, meeting these cybersecurity standards. It's gotten so complicated. We at TideLift put together an information resource center on this that you can find out at our website, tidelift.com. We kind of break down how this all came to pass, starting with the SolarWinds and Log4Shell, the White House cybersecurity executive order in 2021, then the follow-on standards developed by National Institute of Standards and Technology, and most recently the guidance from the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, requiring organizations to start enforcing these secure software development standards during calendar year 2023. So I would recommend folks for a little bit slower pass on all this and a little bit more in-depth, stop by tidelift.com and check out our government standards resource center linked right on the top of the page.
All right, folks. Well, the good news is you're not the only one struggling with this. So there's places to go and people to talk to. Donald, thanks for being on the show.
Mike, love doing it. Thanks for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Johannes Wicklund, who is head of information security for JotForm, and we're going to be talking about what he and other security professionals expect in 2023. Johannes, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here, Mike.
I would say last year was kind of a bit of a rock and roll, up and down roller coaster with lots of drama and stress. So are we going to see more of the same in 2023, or are things going to get better?
I think we're going to see more of the same unless companies implement a full suite of security controls in order to stay ahead of the attackers. One of my predictions for the year is that we really have to layer up our security model. And what I mean by that is take the various layers of security controls that we already have and examine each one for where we can level up each one of those controls to essentially mature our security programs and do what it takes to protect our customers' data.
Everywhere you go, people are talking about zero trust, and that seems to mean identity. So do the controls need to be tuned all the way down to, individual identities for not just end users, but the software and the machines themselves.
Yeah, identity is certainly a big part of it, Mike. I think there are many other layers. I like to think of a layered security model in terms of technology layers, process layers, and people layers. And while identity, as far as network and server controls are concerned, there are also a number of other process-related layers where companies can focus in terms of getting their incident response procedures tuned up, their detection tuned up, and essentially, make sure that you respond rapidly to evolving situations. No level of technology control is ever going to be foolproof. So if and when something bad happens, you have to know how to deal with it. And you also have to have strong and well-trained people to be able to deal with it.
How much of what we need to do is about new platforms versus what you're describing, which is re-engineering of processes and kind of getting the people to think differently about how they go about securing the environment? Seems maybe it's a mix of both, but everywhere you turn, it seems like there's more focus on platforms than process.
Yeah, so I think if you go to any of the security shows, of course, a lot of the sponsors have a vested interest in selling platforms. And there's some truth in platforms being able to help you, but I've also seen big platform implementations fail because companies just haven't been able to operationalize what those tools can do for them. So in my mind, it's really about figuring out what you need to get out of the tool, tuning it in the right way to get those alerts, and then creating processes around those alerts so that you can actually take the right level of action. I've heard horror stories of tools that are, alerting companies to an attacker actually being in your network, and then you see the incident response team kind of just sitting there watching. Oh, we wanted to see what the attacker will do next. So unless you have good incident response procedures and well-trained personnel, just having a nice technology stack isn't going to help you.
What is your sense of how chronic is this shortage of cybersecurity people? We keep hearing about all these open jobs. And yet I talk to a lot of cybersecurity teams and they generally feel competent to deal with what's in front of them. So some days I feel like we're saying, my God, we don't have enough people, but the people who are actually doing it are kind of like pretty confident they've got it under control. So what's the yin and the yang of the staffing shortage?
Well, one of my predictions for 2023 is actually the rise of departmental security champions. And this is really a way for organizations to leverage hidden talent that they may already have, so without increasing headcount. So that's something that I'm focusing on here at JotForm, actually. When I came to JotForm, I inherited a pretty solid team of full-time security engineers, but I also quickly realized we had 14 parallel product teams that are working out on churning out new products and features for our customers. There was no way, even in my wishful mind, that I could staff, a security engineer on every single one of those teams. So I went on a mission to create a program for security champions and recruit folks that, can wear a second hat who are already on those product teams and can do more for security. I could tell you more about how I did that and what the program entails, but the bottom line is, I thought I would get maybe a mild interest of 6 to 8 folks volunteering for this. And guess what? I got 30.
So how did you get them to volunteer at that level? Because a lot of folks are trying to figure this out right now. We hear about shift left and shift right. Shift left is get developers more involved. Shift right is get the product and the IT operations team more involved. But I don't know if a lot of folks are, want to be the volunteer. So how do you kind of get them excited about joining the team?
So the step one, I think, is really to get the executive buy-in. So I met with the VP of product development and some other executives to make sure that they are on board. This is going to actually empower their teams to be better developers. We're not trying to take away too much of their time. And then the second thing I did is I went out and had some lunch and learns where we actually gave developers actionable skills and advice over pizza, and just kind of shared knowledge. And I finished a presentation with a pitch to join the Security Champions team. And, we're starting small, so we're focusing only on product engineers, and it's a 6-month program where we meet bi-weekly to give training and have live discussions, sometimes lively discussions about security topics. And everyone really feels that they're getting skills that's going to help them become a better engineer. And, it's really through those lunch and learns and the pitch that they're gaining skills, upskilling themselves, that we were able to get traction.
How automated do you think security can get? We've been preaching about automation forever and a day. It doesn't seem like we actually get that far. And a lot of people have high expectations for AI in general, but what's your sense of what's really achievable?
I really don't think we're there yet. Definitely not in 2023. I think many companies are still trying to identify what patterns or use cases really represent a threat versus what's normal behavior. Even if you buy a off-the-shelf tool, whether it be a dynamic application security testing tool or a security incident event management that's looking at your logs. The biggest problem I've seen, Mike, with those tools is really the rate of false positives. The tools tend to be architected in such a way that they are, they would rather report on something than ignore it. And, so everyone ends up just getting alert fatigue. So plugging an AI into that pattern without fixing the root cause of the false positives, I'm not sure it's going to do much, right? Because I'm not sure how we can trust the AI to sort through and determine what's a false positive versus something we actually have to do something about.
What's your sense of the bad guys? Are they getting smarter, or is it just that we have so much more of an attack surface to defend that, there's just more places for them to take advantage of holes in the security, but they themselves are just running the same old game?
I think it's a combination. Now, when it comes to AI, certainly the AI, unfortunately, can help empower the bad guys, right? So if you take, kind of the lower level attacker, the AI can actually help them create scripts that, that are attack vectors. However, for us as defenders, I think it's really the cloud sprawl over the last few years that have caused problems, and security departments really need to get control over their cloud sprawl. A few years ago, I was very excited about AWS and later Google Cloud, and the fact that, armed with nothing more than a corporate credit card, I can stand up my own infrastructure in minutes. But guess what? Engineers were doing that also, and they were doing it for proof of concept and prototyping. And many times they were not trained security professionals. They were not thinking about things like default admin credentials or ports being open on the network. So, a lot of compromises early on in the cloud history really came from simple mistakes with the cloud infrastructure. And that's, what you're saying about the attack surface really growing. Many security departments have kind of honed that in right now and have a better understanding of their cloud security posture. But as long as there's developers out there with a corporate credit card and access to any sort of sensitive data or even sensitive code, we still have that problem.
All right. We have met the enemy, and the enemy is us, as it were. What is your sense of, there's more regulations coming down the pike, at least here in the US for sure, with the SEC and these other things. Some people say compliance is the enemy of security. Some people think that if it wasn't for compliance, we wouldn't have any security at all. What's your sense of the value of these regulations as we go forward, and what are you expecting?
So I actually think that compliance aligns with security. So here at JotForm, we're a worldwide company serving almost 19 million users across 140 countries. My responsibility really is to secure the customer's data and meeting their expectations in terms of compliance, whether it be things like PCI for payment cards, HIPAA for healthcare data, GDPR in Europe, or something else. So I have a compliance function under my team, and I believe that as part of a larger risk-based security program, achieving this compliance and aligning that with security is a really important part of the mission.
As you look into 2023, is there anything that we're not paying enough attention to that folks should be looking at and saying, hey, this is going to be a much bigger deal than you think?
It would probably be data privacy. So data privacy is the one issue that, or risk, I guess, that keeps me up at night the most. We hear so much about data breaches, especially among public companies that hold data on millions of consumers. Those consumers are trusting companies with sensitive information, and I believe that companies such as us have to earn that trust. And what do? We have to monitor the platform really on a 24/7 basis, and use extensive log files to check for suspicious behavior. I think the customers are going to be more sensitive to if their data is exposed. There might be more legal action taken, class action lawsuits, and so forth if companies don't, actually implement the right levels of protection. So I think that's where, I'm predicting that in 2023, we're going to either have to layer up our security controls or we're going to have to lawyer up.
Okay. To your point about implementing more layers of security and controls, how do we do that in a way that doesn't disrupt the process that we're trying to secure? Because there seems to be a lot of pushback from people on the other end when they go, well, we want more security, but I don't want to be inconvenienced. So how do we kind of take a digital process and make it as frictionless as possible without
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that some companies are not there yet. I'm lucky enough to work for a company that feels quality first is really a key component of our mission. So we're very defensive when it comes to implementing security measures, and I feel that I am able to have a strong voice in terms of recommending both network security, data security, process-based layers, and finally training our people. Continuing to training people is definitely something that I think is going to be in focus. Rather than making engineers suffer through the same old training about clean desk policy and strong passwords that they've all heard before, what I decided to do is train our engineers on web application vulnerabilities and really give them actionable skills for architecting secure applications. And I think it's being well received. I also think that phishing awareness is a skill set that's needed and trainable throughout any organization. And, I'm not sure how hackers are getting new employees' personal cell phone numbers. It might be through a data breach at another company, but we are facing, as I'm sure many others are too, texting scams targeting our especially new employees, pretending to be your company CEO. And typically it ends with asking for the new employee to go out and buy some gift cards and then emailing or texting them the codes. So, phishing training is something that we really need to give to employees within the first 5 days of their life in the organization, because we don't want them to fall for any of this.
All right. Of course, the trouble is the phishing attacks are getting more sophisticated and harder to detect even by the human eye. Can we really train those end users to see that, or are we going to need a different approach at some point?
Well, so training is certainly only one portion. Another portion is preventive controls that you can put in the process layer. So one of the things that we've done, for example, is a phishing vector is often to change wire transfer instructions on invoices and say, we've changed banks, please send the payment, to this new bank account. So we have a process, which I'm sure many other companies share, where our accounting department has to manually verify any changed payment instructions with a known contact at that company. And the same thing when we set up a new vendor is we don't just take the invoice at face value. We reach out to the company's accounting department and establish what the payment methods should be. So we avoid, the phishing by shutting down kind of the attack vector, which in this case is fraudulent invoices, and, putting layers of process controls on top of it to ensure that just faking a single invoice isn't going to be sufficient to receive a fraudulent wire payment.
All right. So what's that one thing you wish the IT security vendor community would do on behalf of you guys? And is there some pet peeve that you're looking at in 2023, guys, and say, can you just fix this?
Well, rather than naming one single pet peeve, I would say, security vendors as well as SaaS companies like us really need to be industry leaders in security overall. We have millions of users that, we feel it's really important to constantly improve the security program so that we can give these users the confidence they need to trust the data. So it's really about, having a roadmap where you constantly innovate. And, there's always new attack vectors. If something comes to my attention that raises concerns, my job is to really implement the solutions then to ensure that we have those coverage. I don't believe there's a single magic bullet, but if all vendors can be equally attentive to new attack vectors and continue to innovate their products, I think that would put the cyber defenders in a much better place.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here. Trust is one of those things that is hard to gain and easily lost. So pay some extra attention to what's going on in 2023. Johannes, thanks for being on the show.
It's been a pleasure, Mike. Thanks.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Raymond Brancato, who's the newly appointed CEO for Tufin, and we're talking about where security is headed next. Raymond, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Appreciate it.
I think everybody knows you kind of as the guys who help manage firewalls, but the company has evolved since then over the time. So maybe just kind of describe, if you would, where does Tufin fit in the cybersecurity landscape these days?
Tufin fits into security policy management and automation around the firewall, network, hybrid cloud environment. So over the years, we started with firewalls, but have moved into some networks and now into the cloud, also SD-WAN, SASE. So as things have evolved in the network space, we've evolved with it.
Everybody talks about the shortage of cybersecurity personnel, and then everybody nods their head and says we need to automate more, but it doesn't seem to actually happen. So what's your sense of what are the challenges with automating more of the cybersecurity workflows and processes, and what can we look forward to?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. People have been talking about the cybersecurity staff shortage, and they trying to do more with less. The challenge is when you're trying to automate is how do you make it easy? How do you make some of the workflows that customers need to have out of the box so they can get started? So one of the things we're very strong with here at Tufin is helping customers automate by giving that ability to give them some starting points, some certain areas of here's some workflows to get started. Here's some areas to help with your topology. So we believe we're making a strong push in the market around that and helping companies do more automation. And that's a main focus area of ours over the coming years.
One of the issues we hear all the time is that it's not necessarily that we're getting any worse at cybersecurity. It's just that the attack surface keeps getting wider and wider. So do you think as that occurs, will that force this automation conversation because we're just going to reach some level of inability to sustain the current processes?
It's going to have to. It is, networks are becoming more complex, not less. And as we move into hybrid cloud environments, as I mentioned, you've talked about SASE, SD-WAN. There's just a lot more of attack surface that companies need to worry about. So they're going to be forced to automate because of the complexity that's out there now.
Who's driving that level of automation? Because one of the things we are seeing is the cybersecurity folks recognize that they're shorthanded, so they're pushing more responsibility out to either the IT operations team or in some cases the development team. And they have a lot more interest in, of course, automating things as part of their larger workflows. So Do you think that we're reaching some sort of point of epiphany where we're finally figuring out how to manage all this stuff because we just can't leave it all to the security team and hope for the best?
I think everyone is starting to realize, whether it's the DevOps world or in DevSecOps world that we're in now, everyone is starting to realize in different parts of the organization that we have to automate more in order to get where we need to go. And as you mentioned, the companies don't have the people to do all this manually, whether it's in security, whether it's in network operations, whether it's in DevOps itself. Automation is going to have to really start taking off here in order for them to realize the benefits that they want to get at.
You cannot talk about automation these days without somebody bringing up the magic AI phrase. Is it your sense that AI is getting real in cybersecurity, or is it kind of still more of a toy and maybe a little along the lines of wishful thinking?
I think we're a few years away from AI becoming a reality in network security operations. It definitely will get there at some point. And at TUFIN, we're starting to look into AI of how we do things about it. We're a few years away from that. And I think that's where the market's mostly we definitely will see AI in the future, but I'm thinking we're at least 2 to 3 years away from that.
Everybody is also talking about the cost of security and IT these days, given the current, shall we say, unsteady economic outlook. No one knows quite for sure what's going to happen, but it seems like there's an effort to consolidate and rationalize tools. So how do you see that playing out from your perspective?
Yeah, we're, seeing that we may have a 2023 could economically, the U.S. and other companies could go into a recession, right? So companies are looking to, how do I do more with the people I have today? And that is something they want to consolidate tools, like you said, but they also need to become more efficient with what they have. So I think that's where you'll see the automation and efficiencies happening. They're going to be forced to do that because of the economic environment that we're going to be in. You have to get more efficient.
Raymond, we're at the beginning of a new year, and of course, everybody gets the obligatory "what's in your crystal ball" telling you questions. So, from your perspective, what do you think is going to happen in the coming year?
I think we're going to see more and more companies over the last 4 or 5 years. The enterprises have been adopting cloud. I think in the economic situation we're going into over the next year, they're worried about whether the cost of the cloud as well is always a worry to them. But I don't think it's going to slow down. I think the move to a hybrid environment of on-prem cloud and the complexities are going to continue this year. And custom companies are going to have to start thinking about, how do I handle that scale? How do I handle that complexity? And they're going to start figuring out this year that I think automation by the end of the year will be much more of a reality than we see beginning of this year.
And do you think business leaders will be more involved in these conversations as we go forward? It seems like if I look at some of the SEC proposals, they're going to require somebody to be on a board who actually can spell cybersecurity at the very least. We'll see what else they actually know. But, what do you think is going to happen with the business side of this equation?
I think CISOs are becoming part of the executive management and board levels situations now. Companies are always very concerned about potential breaches, and they want to reduce or at least lower the risk of their attack surface out there. So security personnel becoming more important in executive boardrooms and having that discussion. That's going to continue into 2023 and 2024. I think we'll see more of CISOs being part of that executive management discussion, even board level discussions.
As part of that, we have a long love-hate relationship with compliance. On the one hand, it at least gets somebody to do some basic level of security. And on the other hand, it just gets somebody to do some basic level of security. We're starting to see some more regulations coming down the pike. So do you think that the the baseline or the bar for cybersecurity is going to get raised in 2023.
It is. We're seeing it in some of the industries we're working with, whether it's utility industries, the financial industry. There is, there's more and more regulations that are out there for compliance standpoint, and companies have to deal with that. So it's something that's driving some of our business. And I think you'll see more of companies making sure that they're keeping up with the industry regulations and financial regulations that are being imposed upon them.
All right. Well, you talk to as many people as I do. What's your best advice? What are you hearing from folks? What should they be thinking about that maybe isn't top of mind?
I think they need to think about the ability to, we're going into a more complex environment. I think companies and IT executives and cybersecurity executives have to always look at, how do I make sure that I am being compliant, like you mentioned before, I'm able to start automating to stay up to speed, that I'm using my staff shortage that I have into most efficient ways. I think more and more of them are making sure that those things are top of mind. They want to make sure they get compliant. They have going to cloud migration, hybrid cloud environments, and with on-prem and cloud. And so they just want to make sure they're managing all the complexities that they have. And they're worried about it. They need the right tools to help them in that regard.
All right, folks, you heard it here. The catch-22 almost is that if you want to hire the best security talent, you got to make their life as easy as possible. So you got to automate. So if you don't automate, you won't have the best cybersecurity talent. It's that simple. Hey, Raymond, thanks for being on the show.
Michael, thank you for having me. Have a great rest of the week.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
Discover the cutting-edge insights of our new show, AI Times, a series that explores the limitless potential of artificial intelligence. Sponsored by the AI Infrastructure Alliance, the AI Times is at the forefront of the AI revolution, tackling the crucial questions of how we can leverage AI for the betterment of humanity. Stay ahead of the curve as this show delves into all things surrounding AI, including trends, pressing concerns, and the positive impact AI is making around the globe. AI Times.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. We'll be back again tomorrow, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.